Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today, I have a very special guest here, Livia J. Elliot, who is the author and co-creator of what's called Unearthed Stories, an interactive fiction app. Welcome, Livia. How
Thank
are you?
you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited and actually very honored to be here. I have
Okay,
binged
thank
your
you.
channel for so long, so
Okay,
thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I thought we'd kick off by you telling us a little bit what actually is Unearthed Stories. And I think you have a kind like a little thing prepared for us, which we can
Yeah.
share with our viewers. So, what is Unearthed Stories? What's it about?
So they are basically books with choices. The app, as
Okay.
you can see, it's a bookshelf,
Mm-hmm.
similar to, the library on your Kindle.
Yeah, yeah.
So through them, you can pick the different stories that you want to read. Let me
Mm-hmm.
show you another one that is a bit longer. Each of the stories is fantasy or sci-fi in this case,
Okay,
because
yeah.
that's what I like to write.
Which I really
And
appreciate that they were all kind of like speculative fiction stories. Yes,
yeah,
I really like
and they
that.
are all and they are all for adults. So it's not your classical romance application,
Mm,
they all have heavy themes sometimes, because
yeah,
again,
yeah.
that's something that I like to focus. And in here, I'm going to post there. This is how you see each of the stories. So for each
Mm,
of them, once you click the cover, you will see a stat, like for example, the length. There
yeah.
are tags. There is a description. And if I go back to show you Mean in particular, Mean is one of the darkest stories that we have right now.
Mm.
And
I think it's
because
also
of
the
that,
longest one, isn't it? I think
yeah,
that's a full-length novel, actually. Mean, no? Yeah.
yeah. And because of it touches some darker topics, we have, red tags that are
Mm,
actually indicate warnings that you may have. And you can see it here at the bottom. It says read content warnings. If you tap on that, you have a small paragraph of a specific content warnings that you may
mm.
find.
I
And
think
I did that because yeah, sorry, I did that because I sometimes I tend to spoil myself books by going to Goodreads and reading the reviews, because there are topics I don't like reading about, you
mm.
know and
Yeah.
I know that there may be people like me, so that's why we put them there.
Well, yeah, there are lots of people out there who do not like spoilers, no, they're not into that. But there are also a lot of people who really value content warnings and
Yeah.
trigger warnings, no, who do um, yeah, I think are a little bit in this paradox. On the one hand, you want to read those stories that maybe help you to explain what happened to you, to explain your own trauma or your own problem. But on the other hand, you don't want it to be too close at home. No? So I think those
Yes.
trigger warnings are probably very appreciated by people who use the app. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also have a personal rule, and that is I don't like to read violence against women. So
Yeah.
you can see that some of the stories can get very dark, and there is none of it. They are all queer norm worlds with no racial discrimination, no gender discrimination, and
Mm.
no attacks on women. And I think that even without that, for example, Mean goes into very dark territories, into
Yeah. Yeah.
gray morality of what the character ends up doing, because in Mean you can literally choose to kill or spare a
Mm.
character, right?
Yeah, actually,
So
yeah. And I mean, you get this out of this. Well, it's not really first person. It's kind of like almost this inner monologue, no, where you're in the headspace of the character. No, I think from that perspective, choices of do I kill off another character are much more impactful than, for example, if I'm just reading a book in a conventional way.
yeah,
Actually, no. So yeah, I think you're right there that they can get very dark. I mean, I have problems as well with the whole violence against women thing. I wouldn't
yeah,
go as far to say that it shouldn't be included, but I think I don't like it if there is no context provided. No, so if I don't
exactly.
see what's the purpose of this. No, I mean there can be a good purpose for it to heighten awareness or to yeah, even for character development. But I don't like
Yeah,
it if it's just sprinkled on top, like, oh, I need something violent because I'm writing grimdark. What will I do?
yeah,
Oh yeah, I have this female character. No, I think
yeah.
yeah, I think we perhaps still need more awareness about that in some respect. I don't know. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a matter of preference. To me, at least it can make me DNF a book, right?
yeah, and
And
I think you're not the only
it's,
one.
yeah, and I
Yeah,
don't want to write about it. I like to write more on the philosophical side of the plots,
mm,
and the consequences, because in mean, at the end of the day, they are literally playing with the lives of entire countries. And you could
mm,
say that in Restorers, when you find out what happens at the end, the stakes are actually quite high.
yeah,
If you find the ending in which you find out what's happening and who are the what is the goal of that mission, right?
mm,
In
yeah,
general, I write quite a lot of things. I lean
mm,
more towards darker themes. So
yeah.
after writing several darker stories, my partner told me like, then you want a bit of respite, a bit of time to write something more cheerful. And my cat just rolled out like that, and was stretched in cat
But I mean, in all
position.
fairness, there are more cheerful stories there as well. No, I mean, you have quite a good
Yeah,
mix. I think you have stories that are
we have
really,
Herald and the others. Yeah,
yeah, that are really going into the grim dark corner, and then you have, for example, Harold, which is this really charming story about a cat who thinks it's a spy and wants to establish spy headquarters in a tailor's shop, and it's yeah, it's very quirky, very charming, very light-hearted.
yeah.
No, so I think there is a good spectrum of stories that one gets with this app. Um,
Yeah, and Herald actually seemed inspired by my cat. So
I
many
was
of the
wondering, do
things
you
that the
have a
cat
cat?
is doing.
Because this is well observed. I mean, cats are like that. So I was really wondering, kind of like, does she have a cat or not? So that,
Yeah,
yeah,
he actually
that
has.
figures.
He actually has done most of them, even the breaking the journal and all of that. And the the cat is described as being a gray cat and so on, and that's because my cat is gray. Like
Yeah,
a
yeah,
British blue or something like that. So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I with that one, that there is this internet meme that the cats will speak in a very wrong way, like I fits, I sits, and things like
Mm,
that. I
mm.
never like that. I like the Miet meme that the cat was speaking in a very elaborate way. So
I
I
like this
always
as well. I
picture,
like that the tables are turned because the reader
yeah,
is the cat. Um, and the cat, of course, has perfect command of language, and it's the humans that are too dumb to actually understand what the cat is saying. No? And I really like that. I like that kind of like switch in a way.
yeah, and
What
he's
made
also so pedantic,
yeah? What made you decide to kind of like publish your stories in this format? So, I mean, you could have gone down the more traditional route of publishing, or you
Yeah.
could have said, well, that's perhaps too gate capped and self published. So, why an app? I mean,
Oh, the short answer is it's actually a love story. The app. The long answer is that I have been writing my whole life.
okay.
I was taught to read when I was very young. Like
Mm,
I reached the preschool and I was reading fluently. And reading to me, it was always an escape. I
yeah.
will pick
Well,
up whatever
I
books my
think it's
parents
for a lot
had.
of us, especially during our teenage years. I think a lot of us like
Yeah,
to escape into a book.
read. Yeah, and I started writing. I originally, when I was on my teens, I was writing web novels on a
Okay.
blog that I had. So
Okay.
I'm a
So you
millennial,
already had a
so a
little
blog
bit of
was,
experience with
yeah,
presenting stuff in a digital way then.
yeah. Of
Yeah.
course, it was with age appropriate quality because I was on my early teens. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah.
and after that, I always wrote fantasy and sci-fi. things happened. I ended up relocating around the world because I'm in Australia, but I'm Argentinian, and
Okay.
I
Yeah.
couldn't write for a lot of time. I wasn't in a good place in my life until, so I told my partner I want to write again because it
Mm.
always felt cathartic to me. And he said, like, go ahead, I'm going to help you with everything. So I chose to start with a novel that is actually a very long series that I have been writing for 15 years. I
Okay.
tried to quit it, and it wasn't a nice experience. It's not written to market. It's
Mm.
something different. And after that, I had the glorious idea of writing something that was a coming of age or kind of darker story, more philosophical in terms of mental health, like Dance with Me, maybe. And I
Mm.
got some nasty comments from the Asians saying that they were
Oh,
uncomfortable, that I wasn't marketable, or that the stories weren't marketable. So my
mm.
partner came in and told me, he's a video game designer. So he came in and told me, I will make a game of interactive fiction. You can write whatever you want, and you will have full
Great.
control of the stories.
Yeah.
And I say, yeah, let's go. Like, he was doing it for me. So if you see Unearthed Stories, the acronym is US, us,
Yeah.
because it's us.
Oh,
And
great,
yeah,
great offer from
that's
your
how.
partner, I have to say. Um,
Yeah,
I also
so
have to say
how it helps you.
those agents will kick themselves that they didn't sign you up, because I can see this really flourishing, because there are so many advantages
Thank
to
you.
this. No? I personally have very little experience with this type of literature. I mean, I have experience with literature that incorporates visual things. And I actually wrote my master's thesis about an Austrian author and his ideas about text and how text can be widened by incorporating, on the one hand, visual material, and on the other hand,
Yeah.
also musical material.
Mhm.
So I'm familiar with some of those things, but when it comes to, yeah, fiction that really just exists in a digital device, not so much. And I was a bit skeptical. I wouldn't say that I was thinking that the stories wouldn't be good, but I was skeptical about myself. Would I actually enjoy this? And I have to
Yeah.
say, I really surprised myself, because I did enjoy them quite a bit. No? Um, and I can see
Thank
them, for
you.
example, really work for people who are, for example, commuting and are looking for stories
Yeah.
that are in shorter bits. And I think this is almost ideal for this, because you can stop at almost any point. No? So whenever a
Yeah.
new choice comes up, you can decide, Anna, I have to get off at the next stop here and get off my train. I close this now and then come back to it. So it's really very convenient from that point of view as well. Or if you're pressed for time and only have 5 minutes or
Yeah.
15 minutes and just want to sit down and read a tiny bit. No? So, but at the same time, I was surprised how immersed I got in the stories, because the stories are, well, first of all, the stories are actually really very well crafted, I have to say. Now, the plots
Thank
are
you.
very engaging. Um, and I didn't mind after a while this kind, like, you get into the rhythm almost of, okay, the next choice is coming up. I also had stories like Restorer, for example, where I was really kind, like, thinking, I want another choice. Where is the next choice? Come on. You know? So yeah, I think they really work very well. And I really hope this will kind of like take off a lot, because, as I say, I think those agents will regret their decisions.
Thank you. In any
Um,
case, those were traditional novels, like, yeah, books, not interactive fiction. And
yeah,
one day,
yeah,
now I have made my mind, I will go full indie, may have plans for something coming in.
okay,
So,
yeah, sure. I mean,
yeah,
yeah, if that's an option, sure. Um,
yeah.
have you had, before you decided to go down this way, have you had a look at other interactive fiction, and were there kind of like apps that inspired you where you said, oh yeah, this could work for me, or did you just go in totally cold and say, ah, here, we'll do that?
So that's actually a mix. I have been a gamer for my entire life,
Yeah,
and
okay.
I have always leaned towards story-based games.
Mm,
So, for example, the first I started playing was Shining Forces, which was, classical RPG with a lot of classes, and I loved it, and it has a very adventurous story. When I grew up, I went into darker games. Mass Effect is one of my favorite. It's a very complex story, and it's sci-fi. It's
okay.
one of the best sci-fis that I have read. Dragon Age, although I liked more the first game, not the others. And also games that were a bit more philosophical, like Portal, which has a lot of, it's a puzzle, but you also have visuals. The Talos Principle, which you have, if you haven't played, you have to play that one. Is a story about identity and what
Okay. Yeah.
independence actually means, and you play with that while you are solving puzzles, which is amazing. And yeah, so I always had those games in mind. I did play other interactive fiction, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to actually, so most of the interactive fiction out there is generally romance. There are
Mm,
some other, which is fine, but it's not what I wanted to write.
yeah. Yeah.
And there are others, of course, but I didn't really resonate with them, and I didn't like the narrators, how they were written. They were written in a very specific way of what do you choose, and then they will give you the options, and I don't like that. I
Mm,
wanted to fully use the medium in the sense of blending the story with the mechanics and using the mechanics of a video game to actually convey emotions. Because if I have the choice, I can use the choice more than to direct the story. It can be something used for example, as I did in Dance With Me, to cause frustration, because
yeah.
you are reading something. And let me put it up this way: when you are reading a regular book, you have the classical show don't tell, right? And depends on how you
Mm,
present the facts. If I translate it to this format, the show can be using the choice and then take the choice away to actually show how the character is overwhelmed by the traumatic responses that she has
mm,
in Dance With Me, right? So I tried to use all of that to actually tell part of the story or try to make the reader feel something about it. So that's why some of the choices are scratched, or then you have the robot that is complaining that he or it doesn't have any choice, and suddenly they are all four of the same.
yeah.
And it's very blatant, and then you pick one and he says something like, the aesthetic choice, like
Yeah.
it complains about it. And I
Yeah, I
also
think in the
wanted
robot
to,
story, like Restorer, it's very obvious that you, as
yeah,
the reader or player, I don't know, it's somehow in between this, isn't it? Between reading and playing almost. Um, but it's very obvious that the choices
yeah,
are there to frustrate you and to kind like, no, um, I don't know, maybe even push you a bit more into rebelling. At least that was my
yeah.
experience.
There
I
is
went at some
actually,
stage, I went full rebel mode, I have to say. I really had to, I don't know. Um, I like the robot that it has a bit of a literary leaning, that it hacked into a library and kind of like doesn't want to do what it's designed to do, so to say, but it
yeah.
just wants to go to the library and get another quote from the library. So it has
Um,
a very interesting aspect. But I agree with you, and it makes a lot of sense when you say that you're actually coming more from a gaming background into this, because like you say, the stories and the mechanics, it felt very organic to me. I had not this feeling that
Thank you.
the choices interrupt me or interrupt my immersion. And that makes sense, because in a video game or computer game, you do want to stay immersed, even if you have to operate
Yeah,
controls or whatever. No? The controls cannot be so dominant that you can't focus on the game. No, that would be very
yeah,
detrimental in a way. So that makes a lot of
yeah.
sense, Dan. Yeah.
So let me give you two examples that contradict themselves. So one is if you play Tomb Raider, the 2013 edition, I think it is, that one uses everything to immerse you in the game. So there is a scene in which Lara actually climbs through a radio tower, and the camera, instead of following her like this, it follows her from above, so it actually induces vertigo. And when I was playing it, I was like so anxious because I had the vertigo, and it's because they were using that. Or when she goes through the water and she has the water up to here, the camera is actually pushing from the water, and the water covers the camera in a very cinematic
so you can
way.
actually see the water coming towards you then.
So it actually helps you immerse you into that one. It's a very cinematic game. And then you have, for example, in regular RPGs, you have a quest of collect 20 plants, and in the next level collect 25 plants, and in the next level collect 30 of this other item, and it's the same mechanic over and over again. So when I was writing, in many cases, an event made sense plot-wise, but it was annoying mechanic-wise. Right? Sometimes it will feel repetitive because you were doing the same thing, even if in a book it may have worked, right? But the type of choices were exactly the same, right? So in some cases, I use that purposefully. For example, in Restorers, it's like follow the other robot or stay, and then again follow the other robot and stay. It's just like, did you learn anything from the previous one? But if I do it that too many times, it gets annoying. So when we are editing this, my partner is my developmental editor. He actually is very cool. He doesn't only look at the text, he looks at the mechanics. Do they work? Are they repetitive? Are they fun? Because sometimes they may not be fun, or they may be frustrating. And was that my intention, to actually make it frustrating in that particular scene?
Or is it just a side effect, so to say?
A side effect. On one of the stories that I'm working right now, I had to scratch, I think, about 5,000 words and an entire part, because I was repeating the same mechanics, and it was annoying. It felt repetitive, not because of what was happening, but because of the player was basically doing the same and the scene was different. So it got annoying. Right. So there is that other complexity,
One of my questions actually was kind of like, how far do you already figure into your writing process that this will be not a linear text, so to say? So does that play a role right from the start, or do you kind of like write first and then insert some of this?
No, I'm actually an extreme plotter. I cannot write even a short story without having a plot. And for these stories, I have to plot everything. For example, for me, that's almost, I think, 115,000 words. I have list of the variables and the choices, because to give you some context, in that story, the main character is speaking to different people. So suppose that you choose to speak with Ende on chapter number 2, you will never know what Stilo could have said in chapter 2 because you didn't choose him, right? So if I have to take that into account, the knowledge, so that changes, and the conversations that happen after will change depending on what the character knows, and I have to track that. So I have variables in a programming language sense. I have variables that tell me, did you take this choice or did you take this other? And in terms of that are the different, not only what the character says, but a prior choice may enable a new one in the current moment, right? So it was nuts. Writing me in particular, I had like pages of variables, and I had to put up, for example, the variable, what happened, a summary, and what I was thinking when I wrote it as well, and check that with my plot. At the start, when I started writing, I thought that it would take less space, and I did very complex plots that then were extremely long chapters. So I had to start breaking in. That is how Restorers actually got rewritten thrice before the format that you actually see, because I couldn't name it. And I'm always doing something different with each story because I want to learn something new. I want to challenge myself to do something new. But with the ones that you see here, they are all plots to an extreme, because otherwise I don't have a way of tracking, the path and the endings and so on. That's why it gets so difficult sometimes to test them and to check whether they are playable or so on,
Mm.
because, for example, Restorers has 6 different endings, right?
Wow.
And to try each of them, and with all the combinations, it gets exponentially larger, right?
Mm.
And more difficult.
Yeah,
And
one of the things that I found when I was reading those stories was that you actually really get to influence the story by your
yeah,
decision. No, I have only one other experience with an interactive fiction app of a more post-apocalyptic story, and I found it very frustrating because you got choices, and let's say I would take the choice that would deviate me from the previous path. It would let me do this to a certain extent, and then it would kind of get me back onto what the
yeah,
developer clearly thought is the main story and the story that they want to tell. And that's not the case here. Like, you have really no idea where you would go if you would have taken the
yeah.
other option. No? So I have found that really um, yeah, very, very cleverly done in a way. So yeah, um, and
It's
it
always, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, in some respect, it really surprises me when you say that that the stories start to fork that early, like already in the second chapter. If you make a decision that you are already on a different path than if you would make the
Yeah.
other one. Yeah.
There is actually in Restorers, there is a choice on the first chapter, because Restorers is only 4 chapters long. There is
Mm,
a choice on first chapter that can actually have a lot of impact depending on the others. And it always has that, as you said, that branching and comes back, but at some point it breaks very differently. Like uh, chapter 2 in Restorers, you have, I think, 9 different outcomes for that single chapter, and
right.
that will change how it's everything that happens after. Restorers and mean are different, because in restorers you go to the same places in depending what you did, but you arrive differently, you find different stuff, so, and you have different endings depending on what you choose. Mean, if you read up to chapter 2 is completely different depending on the choice at the end of chapter 1, and then they are roughly the same until chapter 9, and from there they break into completely different lines, to the point that characters that are killed in one line survive in the other. And it goes a bit more than that, because there are pieces of information about the plot that you don't find in one line, but you can find on the other.
Okay.
So there is a character who is actually a big important character messing up stuff, and you won't find what that character is planning unless you play one specific path and reach a particular ending. So if you play both paths, right, you will get the whole idea, you will get the whole
Mm,
picture.
yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah. So almost the stories invite to, yeah,
Replay
rereading in a
them.
way. Yeah,
Yeah,
or
I
replaying. Yeah.
actually did that. I haven't shared this anywhere else, but I have a new story coming in April, and the story actually changes once you read it once. So you can only
Okay.
read the original story once, and after you reset it, it will change and it will add content that wasn't there before, and you will never be able to go back to read it as it was the first time.
That
So
sounds quite cool, I have to say. It's
that
a
was
bit like
actually,
burn after reading. So
yeah,
you get
something
one
like that.
set and then it's gone.
I was actually writing the
That's,
story, and
would you
that
say,
actually I didn't plan it. I was writing the story, and
yeah,
suddenly I had this inspiration moment, and my partner was like, "Oh no, what are you going to ask me?"
would you
And
say that's a bit
yeah,
daring, a daring move? Could that be off-putting to readers? What do you think?
with that one, the
Yeah,
replay,
yeah,
you
to
mean?
give the you get to read it once, and as soon like you get a chance to reset and read again, but you will never ever be able to read that one version again.
No, and it
Sounds
actually
very
has
daring to, at least to traditional readers. I could imagine that that
yeah.
sounds challenging.
It's because of the theme of a story. So the
Yeah.
story is about language, and
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
related to that because I generally use a lot of these stories have very meaningful themes. Like Restorers is about how knowledge will enable choices. So the
Mm.
more the character learns, more choices you have, and the fewer you try to go to the library, the less choices you have. Yin
Yeah.
is about control and bias. Dance is about surviving emotional abuse. And yeah, this one is about language. So it has a reason plot wise. The author notes actually explain them
Mm.
why. But then once you come back, there is this other different line explaining it.
Yeah.
So I'm very, very excited to share that story.
I definitely will read that. That sounds, to me, that sounds very cool. I don't know how, as I
Thank
say,
you.
a more traditional reader would feel about it, but to me, it really sounds cool to experience something like that or experience a
Yeah.
story like that. So you said that one inspiration kind like is games and gaming for you. Do you have literary influences as well? Are there favorite authors where you say, yeah, they influence how I write?
The first fantasy that I picked, it wasn't the Lord of the Rings, it was Dune, actually.
Okay.
And I found it on my dad's library. It was, the time that they did the series of Dunes, I think back in the 90s. I was very
Hmm.
young. I found the first book, read it, loved it, honestly. And I think that marked my yeah inspiration in terms of always doing something political or deeper, to use
Hmm.
writing to explore not only a magical system but also speculate on society, on people,
Hmm.
and to do something different. I really like books that are theme heavy, so my three favorite books of all time are Fahrenheit 451,
Okay. Yeah.
Orwell's 1984, and Animal Farm, which I
Okay.
have
So
read
the
so many times.
dystopias are your thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those are the ones. I think it's also because of they resonated quite a bit with me, at least 1984, perhaps because of the situation in which I was living in the country and so on. Argentina is a third world country,
Hmm.
and so that influenced me quite a bit. And I read it at different moments in my life, and it was always like rediscovering it because it had something new,
Hmm.
something else to tell me, because I was changing. I wasn't the same person that read the book 10 years ago, but I was changing. And yeah, another series that I really like, I will probably try to get everybody to read that series, is a Halo from the games.
Okay. Yeah.
It's about 30 something books plus the game. So you have to read the books and you have to put
That's
the games in between. And it's
for
one
the
of the
seasoned
most,
fantasy readers who are into Malazan and that stuff. What's 30
they will
books? Come
probably
on.
love it. It's
Exactly.
It's a political military sci-fi in which
Okay.
some of the books are very military, others are more political, some are Civil
Hmm.
War style, they are very different. And they have a huge cast of characters that, some of them do something in one book, three books after it has a consequence. It has one of my favorite female character in that series. I think Dr. Halsey, I think she's amazing in the books. It's, regardless of what it is, it's a very clear norm world, even in the Halo in the books. Like
Hmm.
there are soldiers that are female, you never get anything. So it was complex and it felt safe to read as well when I found it. I really loved it because of that. Um, I have also liked, stories in games. Like I said before, Mass Effect and Dragon Age were two
Hmm.
stories that I think are complex to the level of books. They also have books, and I really like them. And I really liked how they actually did the entire story. This is the protagonist of Herald,
Ah.
actually. So, sorry, he has a main character syndrome, So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah,
That's a problem.
he knows he's important, of course.
Of
And this
course.
will boost
And
my
he's
channel enormously. Cat content is very popular on YouTube, so
I will get him to say hi. So I another story that I really liked, even if it is newer, for example, World War Z. I loved
Mm,
it. And it's not about zombies. I will say that the zombies are a MacGuffin meant to actually explain the darker or discuss the darker sides of humanity.
yeah,
And yeah, so I
yeah.
generally tend to like stories that are heavy on themes, you know.
Okay. Do you have a
So
favorite theme that you like to explore, or are
I
they
will
all
generally shoehorn.
equal?
I will generally shoehorn political philosophy into anything. So
Okay.
I don't like to discuss ideology. I like to discuss political philosophy in the sense of what is power, what can power imply. Do
Mm,
you need power to do, like more general, yeah, philosophy in general. I also like that in terms of control. I really like reading about the Stoics. So
mm,
you will see that I put up quotes of Stoics everywhere and discussions on them everywhere because I really
yeah.
like them. And I also like writing about mental health. Like
Okay.
dance is about mental health, and the one that I told you that the story changes, that one is also about mental health. So
Mm,
it's about a PTSD survivor. So
okay.
it's
Right.
I really like to explore emotions and yeah, how we see the world differently because of our experiences or gender or
Mm,
country culture and everything. So
yeah. Um, does Argentinian literature play a role for your writing? I think you said you are originally from Argentina. Are there
yeah,
Argentinian writers where you say they have influenced you or are kind of like inspiring
actually
you?
a poet, actually Alma
Hmm.
Fuerte, his stories are always a bit dark, but
Yeah.
his prose just flows. It's amazing. It has a cadence when you read them. It
Mm,
works as well because it's poetry, right? But it has a rhythm, something that, and even although some are very dark, other stories are like the Più Avanti, they are very cheerful or motivating. Even in the darkness, you have something to keep going. And I think that one actually inspired me quite a bit when I was young because he uses allegories, a lot of them. You know,
mm.
it's like everything. If you take the poem like this, it's just not going to work. That's not the meaning of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Right. Do intercultural
Unfortunately, I'm
pardon?
sorry. Unfortunately, I can't share anything from Almafuerte because I think he's not translated. So what I can share is
Probably
from
not.
Spanish.
Probably
Mhm.
not. Um, what about Borges? Is he an influence? Because I thought when you were talking about how your stories are forking all the time, I was reminded of his ideas about libraries. Like he has this story
Yeah,
where it's a library and it
the Library of
contains,
Babel. Yeah,
yeah, exactly, and it contains kind like it's just the one book, but all possible variations of this book. No? So um, it changes one letter at a time. No? So it's kind of like sequential. And that concept reminded me somehow of how you talk about how your stories are kind of like forking and taking different paths. Would he be an
yeah.
influence for you?
I will say that yes, perhaps, especially because the first time I read him, same as with Cortázar, when I read it the first time, I
Hmm.
don't know why they gave me that in school when I was 12 years old. I
That's,
read
I
Borges.
don't
I
think
read
that's,
Borges. No, and I had this feeling of I'm missing half of the story. Like I knew that I was missing half of it and wasn't getting the point. And it haunted me for
yeah.
years. And when I was, I think, on my early 20s, I went in to read him again, and it's like, I'm sorry, it's like peeling an onion, his stories. Like you will
Hmm.
see layers and layers and layers of meaning until you get the point, and there are allegories within the allegories, and if you take them, in some cases, in the political context he was actually trying to make a comment on, it has one meaning, but if you take that out, you can have 1,000 other meanings on them.
Hmm.
So that's something that I really like, that power of writing in general, not only interactive fiction, to have one meaning for the author, but also take multiple meanings depending on what the reader knows, has
Yeah.
experienced, or so on.
Yeah. Um, it's interesting that you say that you read him very young and in school. It's a bit like my experience with Kafka. We had to read Kafka in school, and I was maybe, I don't know, 13, 14 or something like that. And I think at that age, you just don't have the necessary experience to
No.
understand what those writers are coming from, no? And I think it's almost doing a disservice to this type of literature, no, to introduce
Yeah.
it to kind like teenagers in school, because when I then re-encountered Kafka in university, and yeah, like you say, with your experience, that's almost an eye opener that you think, oh my God, look at this! Well, how could I have missed this? No, why did I think that story
Yeah.
was such crap? Because it's not. So yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it's
I
great that literature gives us this opportunity to re-engage, no, but
Yeah.
also you wonder about school sometimes.
Well, they gave me the Metamorphosis, I think, in the
Yeah,
same
yeah,
year,
that's a
and
famous and favorite to do with
I
students.
I
Yeah.
read I read Metamorphosis, and I was just like frowning all around, saying like, "What is this?" I was 12, was not meant to be reading that. And when I took it again, I got it again I think
Mm,
a decade after. I was like, had that feeling of really not liking the story, or heavily disliking it. And when I read it, biased and all, I thought it was very interesting. But
mm,
I was a decade older. I had completely different mindset by that time.
yeah, yeah. Um, yes, we started off by mentioning that you said you do not like writing about violence or reading about violence against women. And
Yeah,
there also is this, yeah, I wouldn't say necessary theory, but this idea that gaming needs more women developers, so female game
yeah.
developers, to develop different types of games. Um, how do you see this? How do you see yourself as a female writer, gamer, developer in this, yeah, at times also very male dominated field?
Yeah, and especially speculative fiction, sometimes it feels like that, even if it has
Mm,
started to change. A lot of the female authors ends up doing, the acronym of a name and the last name to
mm,
disguise that there are women,
yeah,
because
yeah.
otherwise they won't sell, or they write about male protagonists because of the same reason. I think it's challenging, especially because, internet has this trend to label anything written by a woman young adult, even if that's not the public.
Mm,
um, I don't
yeah,
know. I think that there is a public and a readership for everything, that
yeah,
they will find
definitely.
it. It can be only me that wants to read a specific thing, they will probably find it as well.
I
So,
don't think so either. I think like I'm not a
yeah.
writer, but my experience with my channel, for example, is that I get feedback more from women telling me this is a channel I have been waiting for, a channel that
Yeah.
is no that has a woman as its presenter and as its front, so to say, but also a woman who does yeah, more analytical things, no, something that we're still told sometimes that only man can think, no, so
Yeah.
that they say, well, I really appreciate this combination, no, and so I can think, or I would think that with your type of stories and also with games developed by women, that there must be a market. I mean, it would be very,
There
very strange
is.
if there wasn't.
And if you look at, for example, Mass Effect, that game that I mentioned before,
Mhm.
it was one of the first games in which you could play the main character as a man or as a woman, and it's a shooter, so
Okay.
it was quite important. And it was so relevant, especially to a female public, that Female Shepard, which is a female version of the main character, became more famous than the male one, you know?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the voice actor Jennifer Hill, she's always recognized because of that character, right? And so much so that in the last trailers, they actually brought in female shepherd, not a male
Okay.
one.
Yeah.
So there is a public there, and it doesn't mean that it will affect the sales. For example, Horizon Zero Dawn, that actually has a female character. It went, for what I have read, it went through several red tape sessions because the producers didn't want the developers to have a female character because they saw that it didn't have a market, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at it on fiction or in genre fiction, in fantasy, we still have more books with male protagonists. We still have a lot of writers writing male protagonists, and that's fine because sometimes the story you want to tell has a male character, but sometimes I also want to see women in leadership roles, women's like fighters and so on, that are not just the reverse of a trope. Same trope made women. I like to read, and that's, for example, something that I really like from Brandon Sanderson. I read only the Stormlight Archive, but his female characters, they are all amazing. They are all different. They are in depth. They don't go, through the violence cycle to mature and so on. They are completely different one from another, and they are not reverse trope of a male character.
Right.
They have
I
problems sometimes.
haven't read any
Yeah.
Sanderson, so I don't
You
know. He's
should. You
somehow
need to.
bypassed me. Yeah, I get the feeling I need to plug that gap somehow. What I found striking when I was reading your stories was that a lot of the protagonists, so the character whose role you're taking over as the reader, are actually not human or not human
Yep.
anymore. No, so we have a robot, we have a cat, we have a porcelain ballerina, and in Mean we have a character who's a chimera and used to be human, but now is something very different. And
Yeah.
I was wondering, in how far is, I presume it's deliberate that you
It
gravitate to
it
those
is.
non-human characters.
It is. I generally write women or I write something different. I really like to explore, morality or different ethics from perspectives, things that are not human. So try to go, pure speculation, go away from what defines human ethics and morality to write something else. Mean, in particular, she's an alchemist, and they change themselves in a very hazardous way that is not shared in that story. But they are not human anymore. They live centuries. They are described in the story as being outside of time and space. So they can't have the same parameters of morality. She, at some point, the alchemist, has the option to kill a person, and if you kill them, the only concerns are like, okay, are they going to find me out? How do I hide the corpse? It's not like they actually have a concern for what's happening, and that's because they are looking at the world in a different way. I really like to explore that. I really like to go to push speculative fiction beyond just imagining the world into imagining the society or the characters that I'm writing. People read for different reasons, and I generally read for two things: the themes and the novelty. Not only in terms of don't give me the same trope, but also on the idea of show me something that I haven't read, something that I, as a human living in this world, in this country, can't experience. That's what I search in the books. That's what I like to write. The question: how will this being go through this situation? That's why we end up with a robot and so on. In the two upcoming that I have, they are at least both humans, but there are some other things going on that change the world.
Okay. Yeah. No, it just occurred to me also that when we were talking about kind of like women writing women, and I mean, one of the things that I really sometimes do not like about fantasy is how gendered it still is,
Yeah.
But I think if you have non-human characters, then the stories become really accessible, or more accessible for just anybody, irrespective of their gender, because it does, as you say, those considerations do not play a role for those characters. They are just governed by completely different laws and completely different ideas about what it means to be, let's say, sentient, because they're all sentient, your
Yeah.
characters. So yeah.
Well, in Mean at least you have human characters, just you don't play as one. We have
Mm,
Ende, which is the ruler of the society, Irene, which is one of the librarians, Messia, which is a small character but quite important, and there are
mm,
several women in the story. And in that society, in Estresia in particular, there is no gender division. It's like
mm.
they don't care. We are in
Yeah,
a
yeah,
fantasy world. They don't even have to have our own
mm,
same rules. So
yeah,
in that world, they don't care. And that's generally how I write it. Like there are other things that are, at least I think I can do with my writing if I want to take the story through a dark path rather than simply putting a gender division, you know?
yeah, yeah. Um, if you don't have anything else to add from your side, then I would actually say that's perhaps a good ending point, no? This, how shall I say, almost, yeah, big, big plus of fantasy and speculative fiction, no? That we can really imagine stuff that otherwise is not possible, no? So,
Yeah. And
yeah.
thank you
So,
so much for inviting me.
ah, total pleasure, absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed this. I've learned a lot because, as I say, no, this is not what I normally would read and would gravitate to, but I'm definitely be on the lookout for more of those stories. Um,
Well,
you,
now,
yeah. So I think you also have a YouTube channel and a podcast. Is that correct?
yes, that's
Yeah.
correct. And in terms of what you said, that reading more stories, there are two new stories coming in on April. So
Yeah. Okay.
they are going to be very different. So, and
Okay.
yes, I also have a podcast that is called Books Undone. They can
Mm,
find it here in YouTube, and it's almost everywhere, including Audible. And what I do in that podcast is I take one book and I do a deep dive. I will scavenge quotes and I will go through the themes and do a very in-depth discussion. That's generally what I like to do. And I'm starting two new series within the podcast. One are group discussions in which we actually discussed Cortázar and
mm,
that you asked. And there is another one scheduled for Borges. So that
mm.
will be very
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm also starting a new series in the area of authors spotlights. So I bring an author in and we discuss the themes on their book. So it's actually very spoilery because of the nature of it. Yeah.
Ah, well, uh, yeah. So at the moment, the app is available in the Google App Store, I think. So it's
Yeah,
available for
it's for
Android.
Android and for iOS. So in Android, at this moment of recording this, you can just go to the link, get it to play. It's free.
Mm,
And most of the stories are free as well. So literally it costs nothing to read them. And in iOS, you could pre-order, which will really help us if you pre-order, and the app will be released on March 6th. And that means that on that date, it will install automatically in your phone. And because we set up the date for Australia, which is actually in the future, that means March 5 for everybody who's in US and Europe. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. I think I will put links to all of this into the description box so
Yeah.
viewers can find the stuff we were talking about here. And yes, thank you again, Livia, for coming
Thank you
on
for
here. As
inviting
always,
me. Yeah.
great, great pleasure. Thank you. And thank you, everybody
Mm.
who's viewing. And as always, happy reading and all the best. Thanks.
Bye.